In this lesson, we'll create a night version of the scene. To do that, we need to adjust the lighting. However, before we get started, click on the Asset Editor and let's change our preview settings to render very quickly. First, let's switch on Progressive Mode, and for the quality, let's move the slider to low. Also, down here in Render Output, make sure your resolution is set to 800 by 640. Next, click on the Flyout menu and go into Global Illumination, and let's switch the primary rays to a radiance map. As you'll recall from earlier in the lesson, this mode is often faster and ideal for draft renders. Additionally, we can get a faster lighting preview by checking on the Material Override setting. Be careful though not to override the glass material, or otherwise we won't be able to see any of the light passing through. To prevent overriding the glass material, we need to uncheck the Materials Can Be Overridden setting. You can locate this by clicking on the Materials tab, and in the Material list, select the glass. Click on Material Options, and you will find the Can Be Overridden setting. Make sure it is unchecked, otherwise the glass will become opaque. Let's also uncheck this setting for the glass, frosted, shiny material in the Materials list as well. Now we're ready to tweak the lighting. Since we're making a night scene, let's go to the Light tab and click here to turn off the sunlight. There's more light than the sunlight in our scene though. Back over in the settings, there's an option for environment. Go ahead and click on that. Currently, it's using a sky map. We want to turn that map off so that the sky isn't casting any light. Right-click on it and go ahead and clear the map. Now, if the background is black, there will be zero light in here, which will be way too dark even for nighttime. Instead, let's click on this color swatch and set it to a saturated blue color. Another thing we need to adjust before we preview our scene is the exposure in the Camera tab. Let's click on the Camera option, and for the exposure value, I know that 10 should work fairly well for our purposes, so we'll go ahead and set it to that. Now that we've set up our quick draft settings and made some adjustments to the lighting of the scene, let's go ahead and click Render to preview our changes. Once you're comfortable with your environment lighting, it's time to add some artificial lights to the interior. First, let's switch to the interactive render mode and click Render one more time. Now with the IPR going, it's time to add a spotlight somewhere close to the ground here. Go to the V-Ray toolbar and select the Spotlight tool. Now, create the spotlight and position it slightly above the ground, pointing downward. You can use the top and front views as well for better control. The first setting we want to change is the decay. Let's set it to inverse square, so that the light behaves realistically and surfaces farther from the light will appear darker than surfaces closer to the light. Now you can see that the light is very weak, so under Units, let's change it to radiant power or watts, so that the intensity of the light does not depend on its size. Now, let's reduce the intensity to something like 3. Let's also warm the light up a bit by clicking on the color swatch and setting it to a warm orange color. Then, set the cone angle to 70 and the penumbra fall off to 30. To avoid creating any harsh shadows, we can also increase the shadow radius to something like 10. Finally, I will move the spotlight a bit over here. If you need to reposition the light or further tweak some of its settings for better lighting, feel free to do so. Now that we have set up the spotlight, let's set up the 3 IES lights here above the bathroom. First, let's go ahead and stop the interactive render while we set up the IES lights. Now, head over to the V-Ray toolbar and click on the IES light tool to place the first IES light. Once we have positioned it in the scene, go ahead and navigate to the Assets folder and select the IES light that comes along with this bonus lesson. Then click OK. Feel free to play around with the position of the IES light to suit your satisfaction. I'm also going to make 2 duplicates of the light by holding Alt and dragging the IES light to the side. Then, I'll select all 3 IES lights and rotate them together so that they are all halfway pointing at the floor. Now let's start the interactive render again and see the effect the IES lights add to our scene. Again, if you need to adjust the position or the rotation of the IES lights further, feel free to do so. I'd also like to use the same orange color for the IES lights as the one we set for the spotlight. Let's select the spotlight from the Lights tab, and then from the flyout menu, right-click on the orange color and select Copy. Next, select the IES light from the Lights list, and in the color swatch, right-click and paste that orange color. I will then reduce the brightness of the IES light by clicking on this checkbox here and setting the brightness to something like 500. In addition, we can also add a sphere light in the bathroom. Again, let's first stop the interactive render and close the frame buffer. Now, choose the sphere light tool and draw the light in this area. Then adjust the position of the sphere light. Once it's set, start the preview render to see how it looks. Meanwhile, let's also copy the warm orange color from the IES light and paste it to the sphere light. In this case, I will keep it set to the default brightness of 30. Finally, let's add a plane light with the purpose of adding a fill light to our scene. Stop the render again, and let's close both the frame buffer and the asset editor. Then, select the rectangle light tool and draw a rectangle on a flat surface. Next, position the light right by the wall so that the light is facing the room, and rotate the light so that the arrow is pointing towards the interior of the scene. Make any final adjustments to the position of the rectangle light, and let's hit render. Once again, we also need to adjust the brightness, so let's set it to 4. For the color, this time let's copy the environment's blue color and paste it into the rectangle light's color swatch. Now that we've added some additional lighting to our scene, let's stop the render and head back over to the Settings tab to add one more effect. Under the Camera menu, click on the Effects menu dropdown, and let's add some vignetting. Set the value to 0.3. Okay, we're ready to create a high-quality render. Go ahead and check off both interactive and progressive modes so that we render using buckets, and then set the quality to high. In the render output, let's change the resolution back to 1200 by 960. Also, don't forget to turn off the material override setting so we can see all of the materials we applied. Finally, in the Global Illumination tab, let's switch the primary rays from a radiance map back to brute force. When you're ready, go ahead and press render. And now you have your final render. Let's also apply a few color corrections. In my case, I'm going to adjust the exposure to balance out the brightness. I'll also tweak the white balance color temperature to make the image a bit warmer, and adjust the color balance to add some more warmth to the highlights. Finally, I'll adjust the curve to add more contrast.